Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the apprentice of Wonder Woman on Themyscira. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for 8-year-old Izuku Midoriya, had always been a kaleidoscope of vibrant colors and explosive sounds, a living comic book panel where heroes soared and villains fell. He saw the world through the lens of All Might's indomitable smile, a place where any problem could be solved with enough heart and a powerful enough punch. Even now, standing on the gently rocking deck of the Emerald Hope, a chartered yacht his father had insisted was a once-in-a-lifetime adventure, the world was perfect. The Pacific Ocean was a vast, cerulean canvas under a benevolent sun. His mother Inko was laughing, her green hair, so like his own, a soft halo in the afternoon light as she pointed out a pod of dolphins racing the bow. His father, Hisashi, stood at the railing, a rare, relaxed smile on his face, his usual businesslike tension dissolved by the sea salt and endless horizon. He'd been working overseas for what felt like forever, and this trip was meant to be a grand reunion, a bridge across the months of grainy video calls. "See, Izuku?" Hisashi said, ruffling his son's unruly hair. "This is the real world. Bigger than any hero agency, grander than any city." Izuku nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the small, worn All Might figurine clutched in his hand. He held it up, angling it so the plastic hero seemed to fly over the waves. "All Might could cross it in one jump, I'd bet," he declared with the unshakable faith of the truly devoted. His mother's laughter was like wind chimes. "I'm sure he could, sweetie. But I think even All Might would want to slow down and enjoy a day like this." It was the last perfect moment. The last memory that wasn't tainted by the shriek of the wind and the taste of terror. It began subtly. The sky, a perfect, cloudless blue, began to bruise at the edges. A strange, violet-gray color seeped in from the horizon, moving with an unnatural speed. The sea, once placid, grew restless, its gentle rocking becoming a nervous, choppy rhythm. The captain, a seasoned sailor with a face like tan leather, had come out of the cabin, his brow furrowed as he scanned the sky. "Never seen a squall comin' that fast," he'd muttered, his voice a low growl of concern. "Or that color." Within minutes the day was stolen. The sun vanished behind a roiling mass of clouds that churned with an internal, sickly green and purple light, as if the sky itself were poisoned. The wind began to howl, a low, mournful sound that quickly escalated into a high-pitched, predatory shriek. Rain fell not in drops but in hard, stinging sheets that felt like thrown gravel. The Emerald Hope became a toy in a giant's angry bathtub. It was thrown upwards on the crest of mountainous waves, only to slam down into the troughs with a bone-jarring crash that sent shudders through its every plank. Izuku, small and terrified, was held in his mother's desperate embrace inside the main cabin. The windows were opaque with seawater, the only light the flickering emergency lamps and the eerie, otherworldly flashes from the storm outside. "It's okay, Izuku," Inko whispered, her voice trembling but trying so hard to be the bedrock of calm he needed. "It's just a storm. It will pass. We're safe." He buried his face in her shirt, the scent of her perfume a tiny anchor in the chaos. He could hear his father shouting with the captain outside, their words torn away by the gale. Then came a sound that was not the storm. It was a deep, groaning crack, the sound of a giant's bones snapping. The floor tilted violently, sending them sliding across the cabin. Hisashi burst through the door, his face pale and drenched, his eyes wide with a fear Izuku had never seen in him before. "The mast is gone! We're taking on water! We have to get to the life raft!" The next moments were a blur of cold spray, screaming wind, and a chaos so absolute it felt like the end of the world. Hisashi managed to get a small, bright orange life vest around Izuku, his fingers fumbling with the clips. "You have to be brave, son!" he yelled over the roar. "Braver than All Might. You understand?" Izuku, crying too hard to speak, could only nod. His mother kissed his forehead, her lips cold and wet. "We love you so much, Izuku. Never ever forget that." They were on the deck, a treacherous landscape of snapped cables and splintering wood. A wave, a liquid monster with a foaming mouth, crashed over the side, sweeping the captain into the black, churning water. There was no time to scream, no time to grieve. Hisashi was fighting with the release for the emergency raft when another sound, a final, deafening shriek of tortured metal, split the air. The yacht was breaking apart. Izuku felt the deck beneath him give way. For a terrifying second, he was airborne, weightless in the heart of the storm. Then, the brutal, shocking cold of the ocean enveloped him. It was a physical blow, stealing his breath and driving the air from his lungs. He surfaced, sputtering, the life vest thankfully doing its job. The waves were colossal, lifting him up, giving him a horrifying panorama of the wreckage of his life. He saw the Emerald Hope disappear beneath the waves. He saw a flash of his mother's green hair. He heard his father scream his name. Then they were gone. He was alone. Clinging to a large piece of the splintered hull, Izuku Midoriya wept. He called for his mom, for his dad, until his throat was raw and his voice was just a hoarse whisper swallowed by the storm. The unnatural lightning flashed, illuminating a world of black, angry water. The cold seeped into his bones, a deep, pervasive chill that promised a slow, quiet end. His small fingers, numb and white, barely held on. His all-might figurine was still clutched in his fist, its painted smile a cruel joke in the face of such utter despair. He closed his eyes, the tears freezing on his cheeks, and let the exhaustion pull him down into a darkness as deep and unforgiving as the ocean itself. On the island of Themyscira, the storm was not a matter of weather, but of sorcery. Princess Diana stood on the highest watchtower of the coastal fortress of Terna, her dark hair a stark banner against the bruised, violent sky. The wind, imbued with a malevolent energy, whipped at her ceremonial armor, but she stood as immovable as the ancient marble beneath her feet. The Amazons did not fear storms, but this was different. This was a wound in the world. For millennia, their island had been shielded from man's world by a powerful magical ward, a gift from the goddesses. It was a barrier of mist and misdirection, making them invisible, unreachable. A ship that sailed towards their shores would find itself inexplicably turned around, its crew remembering only a patch of dense, disorienting fog. But this storm, this raw, untamed display of chaotic magic, was fraying the edges of their protection. Diana could feel it, a subtle tremor in the very air she breathed, a discordant note in the symphony of the island's life force. "The barrier flickers, princess," said Philippus, her general and one of her oldest friends, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. "It has not done so in centuries. It is not the storm itself," Diana replied, her gaze fixed on the tumultuous sea. "The storm is a hammer, striking at a weakness that was already there. Something has changed in the world outside." Below them, the city was on alert. Legions of Amazons, their bronze and silver armor gleaming in the eerie light, patrolled the white marble streets and stood vigil on the ramparts. They were warriors born and bred, their calm a product of supreme confidence and discipline. Yet, an undercurrent of unease rippled through them. Themyscira was paradise, a sanctuary of peace and strength. To have that peace threatened, however slightly, was a profound shock. Diana felt a sudden, sharp pang in the ward, like a string on a harp being plucked and then snapping. It was a localized breach, small and temporary, but it was there. It was centered on the eastern beach, a stretch of pristine white sand where she had often walked in quiet contemplation. "Philippus, maintain the watch," Diana commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that belied her serene features. "I will investigate the breach myself." Before the general could protest, Diana was moving. She did not take the winding stone stairs. With a grace that was both divine and honed by a lifetime of training, she leaped from the high tower. She fell for 100 feet, a scarlet and blue streak against the gray, before landing on the soft sand below as lightly as a falling leaf. The impact barely left a mark. She ran, her speed a blur that the human eye could not follow. The beach stretched before her, littered with the debris of the outside world, splintered wood, a tattered piece of sail, foreign things that felt like a sacrilege on this sacred soil. It was the refuse of the storm, debris that had slipped through the momentary weakness in the barrier. Then she saw it, a splash of garish orange against the pale sand. A small, dark shape huddled within it. Her first thought was that it was some strange sea creature, washed ashore by the tempest. But as she drew closer, her superhumanly sharp eyes picked out the details, and her heart, A heart that had faced down gods and monsters without a flutter, gave a painful lurch. It was not a creature. It was a child. A human child. And as she came to a halt just a few feet away, the impossible, world-altering truth crashed down upon her. It was a boy. He was tiny, curled in on himself, half buried in the wet sand. His clothes were torn and soaked through. His skin was a frightening, pale blue, and his lips were tinged with a deeper violet. One of his small hands was buried in the sand, but the other was clenched tightly around a small, brightly colored figurine of a muscular man with a ridiculous, exaggerated smile. His hair, a chaotic mop of dark green, was matted with sand and seaweed. For a long moment, Diana simply stared. A male. A male on Themyscira. The law was absolute, unchanged for 3,000 years. No man may set foot on this island. To do so was to invite death. The law was the foundation of their society, the sacred pact that ensured their peace and protection from the corruption and violence of man's world. But the law was written for men, for warriors, for invaders, for kings. It was not written for this. It was not written for a half-drowned, freezing child, no older than she had been when she first learned to string a bow. She knelt, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached out a hand, hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently brushing the wet hair from his forehead. His skin was ice-cold. A faint, shallow puff of condensation ghosted from his lips. He was alive. Barely. All thoughts of law and tradition evaporated like sea spray on hot stone. All she saw was a life flickering on the verge of being extinguished, and the core, the very essence of what it meant to be an Amazon, to be a protector of the innocent, surged to the forefront. This was not an invader. This was a victim. This was a refugee. Her compassion, a force as mighty as her divine strength, overrode everything. With infinite gentleness, she slipped her arms beneath the small, frail body. He weighed almost nothing. As she lifted him, his head lolled back against her arm, and a soft, pained whimper escaped his lips. The sound pierced her heart more keenly than any sword. Cradling the boy against the warmth of her own body, she wrapped her scarlet cape around him, a desperate attempt to shield him from the biting wind. She looked down at the pale, unconscious face, at the faint dusting of freckles across his cheeks, and made a decision. Let the council debate. Let the law be questioned. She would not let this child die, not on her watch. Not on her island. With the strange, impossible burden held securely in her arms, Diana of Themyscira turned her back to the raging sea and began the journey back to the city, carrying the spark of a life that would change her world forever. The reaction was precisely what she had anticipated, and yet its intensity was still jarring. As Diana strode through the magnificent gates of Turna, the storm finally beginning to recede, a wave of silence washed over the city, followed by a tidal wave of shocked, angry whispers. The Amazons who saw her, their eyes widening first at the bundle in her arms and then registering the impossible truth of what it was, froze in their duties. The news spread through the city faster than fire through a dry forest. By the time she reached the central plaza before the royal palace, a crowd had gathered. They were warriors, 1,000 strong, their faces a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and outright hostility. They parted for her, as they always did for their princess, but it was a tense, reluctant separation. Their hands rested on the hilts of their swords, their spears held just a little tighter. "Princess?" a young warrior named Io asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What is that?" "It is a child, Io," Diana answered, her voice calm but carrying over the murmurs. "A survivor from the storm. It is a boy." A harsh voice cut through the air. The crowd shifted, and Artemis of Bonamidal strode forward. She was second only to Diana in martial prowess, a formidable warrior with fiery red hair braided tightly back and a permanent scowl etched on her face. She was the staunchest of traditionalists, a fervent guardian of Amazonian law. Her eyes, the color of chips of flint, were fixed on the child in Diana's arms, her expression one of pure revulsion. "You have brought a male onto our sacred soil," Artemis said, her voice dangerously low. "You have broken the oldest law. You defile this place with his presence." "I have saved a life, Artemis," Diana countered, her gaze unwavering. "He is a child, lost and dying. Or would you have had me leave him on the beach to perish?" Is that the compassion of an Amazon? Compassion does not extend to our jailers. To our enemies. Artemis shot back, her voice rising. For millennia we have kept ourselves pure, safe from their world of war and deceit, and you, our princess, are the first to invite the serpent into the garden. A roar of agreement went up from a faction of the warriors, those who followed Artemis's hard-line ideology. Others looked conflicted, their gazes shifting between the furious Artemis, their beloved princess, and the pathetic, still form of the boy. He is not a serpent, he is a child, Diana insisted, holding Izuku a little closer, as if to shield him from the venom in Artemis's words. Look at him. There is no malice here. Only pain. His very nature is the malice. Artemis spat. Give him to me. I will cast him back into the sea. The ocean has made its judgment. It is not for you to overturn it. She took a step forward, her hand outstretched. Diana mirrored the movement, shifting Izuku to one arm and placing her other hand on the hilt of her sword. The message was clear. The air crackled with tension. Two of the greatest warriors on the island, poised on the brink of conflict. Enough. The voice was not loud, but it possessed an authority that cut through the anger and uncertainty like a blade. It was the voice of Queen Hippolyta. She stood on the grand steps of the palace, flanked by her royal guard. She was regal, timeless, her face beautiful but etched with the wisdom and sorrow of ages. Her eyes, so like Diana's, surveyed the scene, taking in her daughter's defiance, Artemis's fury, and the child at the center of it all. Bring the boy inside, Diana, she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. Artemis, you will have your say. But it will be in the council chamber, not in the city square. Artemis bristled, but she bowed her head in deference to her queen. As you command, my queen. Diana met her mother's gaze, a silent exchange passing between them. There was love there, but also a profound gravity. Diana had not just broken a law, she had challenged the very identity of her people. She followed her mother into the palace, the heavy bronze doors closing behind them, shutting out the murmuring crowd but not the conflict that had just begun. The Grand Council Chamber was a breathtaking space. The ceiling was a high, vaulted dome painted with the constellations. Marble columns carved with the likenesses of goddesses and ancient heroes held it aloft. In the center, on a raised dais, sat the throne of Themyscira. Queen Hippolyta took her seat, a silent, imposing figure. Diana stood before her, still holding the child, who had been wrapped in a warm, dry blanket by a palace healer. Artemis and the other senior Amazons formed a semicircle, their faces grim. State your case, Artemis, the queen said, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. Artemis stepped forward, her passion a palpable force. My queen, the law is the law. For 3,000 years it has kept us safe. It has kept us free. This, boy, is a violation of that law. His arrival coincided with the weakening of our barrier. He is an omen, a harbinger of the chaos of man's world that we fled so long ago. We do not know what corruption, what taint he brings with him. The risk is too great. For the safety of all, he must be removed. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled council. Artemis's argument was powerful because it was rooted in their deepest fears. Then, Hippolyta's gaze fell upon her daughter. Diana stepped forward, her voice ringing with a clarity and conviction that silenced the room. Mother, council sisters. Artemis speaks of law and fear. I speak of justice and compassion. We call ourselves protectors. We train to defend the innocent. Tell me, who is more innocent than this child? She gently adjusted the blanket, revealing Izuku's face. He was still deathly pale, but some of the blue had receded from his lips. He looked heartbreakingly small and fragile against the grandeur of the chamber. We are not so weak that the presence of a single, helpless child can undo us, Diana continued, her voice swelling with emotion. Our peace is not so fragile that the tears of a lost boy can shatter it. If our traditions force us to be cruel, then what is the value of those traditions? We were given this island as a sanctuary, a place to cultivate the best of what it means to be human, courage, honor, and compassion. If we turn him away, if we let him die for the crime of being born a boy and washing up on our shore, then we betray everything we claim to be. We become the very monsters we sought to escape. She locked eyes with Artemis. You call him a serpent. I call him a soul in need. And I will not stand by and watch my people, the noble Amazons of Themyscira, act with the heartless cruelty of a tyrant. The chamber was silent. Diana's words, a powerful appeal to their highest ideals, had struck a chord. Many of the Amazons who had nodded along with Artemis now looked uncertain, their expressions troubled. Queen Hippolyta remained impassive, but her eyes were fixed on the boy. For a long, tense minute, she said nothing. She rose from her throne and descended the dais, her royal robes whispering against the marble floor. She stopped before Diana, not looking at her daughter, but at the child she held. With a tenderness that surprised many, she reached out and brushed a thumb across the boy's cheek. He stirred at the touch, a faint moan escaping his lips. His brow furrowed in a dream of pain and loss. The law is a shield, Artemis, Hippolyta said, her voice soft but resonant. It is not a cage. It was made to protect us, not to hollow out our hearts. She turned to face the council. He will not be cast out. He will not be put to death. A gasp went through the room. Artemis looked ready to explode. My queen, you cannot. I can, Hippolyta interrupted, her authority absolute. However, his presence here is a matter of grave importance. The law has been broken. The balance has been disturbed. He cannot simply be accepted among us without trial. Diana's heart sank. A trial? A trial for what? For surviving? He will not be judged by a trial of arms, the queen continued, as if reading her daughter's mind. To test his strength against an Amazon would be a mockery of justice. No. He will face a trial of the spirit. We will see if the heart that beats within his chest is worthy of the sanctuary he has found. We will determine if he is a threat not through the strength of his fists, but through the quality of his soul. It was a masterful compromise. It upheld the sanctity of the law by demanding a trial, appeasing the traditionalists. But it defined the trial in terms that gave the boy a chance, honoring Diana's plea for compassion. Artemis clamped her jaw shut, her disagreement clear but her obedience to her queen paramount. She gave a stiff, formal bow. It will be done, my queen, Hippolyta declared, her gaze sweeping the chamber. The child will be taken to the chambers of healing. When he has recovered his strength, the trial will commence. Until then, he is under my protection. This council is dismissed. The Amazons filed out, their hushed conversations filling the void. Soon, only Hippolyta and Diana remained, with the sleeping child between them. You have taken a great risk, my daughter, Hippolyta said quietly. I did what I believed was right, Diana replied. I know, the queen said, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. It is why you will one day be a great queen, and why you cause me so much worry. She looked down at the boy again. Take him to the healers. See to it that he is cared for. Diana nodded, a wave of relief washing over her. He had a chance. That was all she had asked for. Izuku awoke to softness and silence. For a moment, he remembered nothing. There was only the gentle weight of a thick, woven blanket, the comfortable press of a soft mattress beneath him, and a profound, bone-deep quiet that was utterly alien. The air smelled of strange, sweet flowers and something clean, like rain on stone. Then, memory returned, and it was not a gentle stream but a catastrophic flood. The storm. The tilting deck. The impossible, monstrous waves. His father's desperate shout. His mother's cold kiss. The suffocating, icy blackness of the water. He gasped, a raw, ragged sound, and his eyes flew open. He was in a large, airy room carved from white stone that seemed to glow with a soft, internal light. Sunlight, warm and golden, streamed through an open archway, revealing a balcony that overlooked a stunningly beautiful city of white towers and lush, green gardens. Panic seized him. Where was he? Where were his parents? He tried to sit up, but his body was a dead weight, heavy with an exhaustion so complete it felt as if his very bones were made of lead. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he fell back against the pillows. Tears began to well in his eyes, hot and silent. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his small chest that made it hard to breathe. He was alone. The truth of it was absolute and terrifying. His mom and dad were gone. He was lost. A sob escaped his lips, small and broken. He squeezed his eyes shut, wishing he could wake up from this horrible dream. He wished he were back on the yacht, with his mom laughing and his dad pointing at the horizon. "It is all right. You are safe." The voice was like music, low and gentle, imbued with a warmth that seemed to push back the encroaching despair. Izuku's eyes snapped open again. A woman was sitting in a chair beside his bed. She was the most beautiful person he had ever seen, more beautiful than any actress on TV or any drawing in his hero magazines. She was impossibly tall, with long, flowing black hair, skin the color of warm bronze, and eyes that were a deep, kind brown. She wore a simple white tunic, but she held herself with a power and grace that made him think of ancient queens in storybooks. He stared at her, terrified and awestruck. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a faint, scratchy squeak. The woman smiled, a small, gentle curve of her lips that reached her eyes. "Do not be afraid. My name is Diana. You are on the island of Themyscira. You were caught in the storm. I found you on the shore." Each word was spoken slowly, clearly. Themyscira? He'd never heard of it. He looked down, and saw his right hand was still clenched. He slowly, painfully, opened his fingers. The little All Might figurine was still there, its plastic smile looking faded and chipped. It was the only familiar thing in this strange new world. The sight of it broke the dam, and the silent tears turned into full-body, hiccuping sobs. Diana's expression softened with a deep, profound empathy. She didn't say, "Don't cry," or, "It will be okay." She simply sat with him, a quiet, powerful presence, letting him grieve. After a few moments, she reached out and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Her hand was large and warm, and the simple touch was incredibly comforting, a small point of stillness in his swirling sea of pain. "I know you are scared," she said softly, "and you have lost a great deal. I cannot take that pain away. But I can promise you this, while you are here, you will be safe." Izuku looked up at her, his vision blurred by tears. He saw no pity in her eyes, only a sincere, powerful compassion. She wasn't looking at a nuisance or a problem. She was looking at him. He didn't understand where he was, or what would happen to him, or how he could possibly go on without his parents. But as he looked into the eyes of this strange, beautiful woman, one small, fragile feeling took root in the desolate wasteland of his heart. For the first time since the sky had turned dark, he felt the tiniest glimmer of hope. He was safe. For now. The days that followed were a waking dream, a tapestry of profound grief woven with threads of surreal wonder. Izuku was housed in the chambers of healing, a wing of the palace where sunlight seemed to be a physical ingredient, pouring through open-air archways and reflecting off floors polished to a mirror sheen. The air was perpetually scented with sea salt, and a mix of herbs he couldn't name. His physical wounds healed quickly under the care of Amazonian healers. They were tall, solemn women who moved with a quiet efficiency, their hands gentle as they applied strange-smelling salves to his scrapes and offered him broths that tasted of sunshine and the earth. Yet they kept their distance. Their faces were not unkind, but they were guarded, their eyes holding a deep, ancient wariness. They spoke to him in soft, melodic tones, but their conversations were brief, functional. He was an anomaly, a puzzle they were tasked with solving, not a guest to be welcomed. The deeper wounds, the ones carved into his soul, did not yield so easily. Grief was a leaden blanket that smothered him day and night. He would wake from nightmares of churning black water, and his mother's fading face, his small body drenched in a cold sweat. During the day, he would sit for hours on the balcony of his room, staring out at the impossible city, clutching his All Might figurine so tightly the plastic edges dug into his palm. It was his last link to a world that had been stolen from him, a smiling talisman against a world of sorrow. Diana was his only constant. She visited him every day, a radiant presence in his muted world. She never pushed him to talk about the storm. Instead, she sat with him, sometimes for hours, in a comfortable silence. She told him stories of the goddesses who watched over the island, of heroes of myth who fought not just with swords but with wits and courage. She described the constellations that wheeled across the night sky, giving them names like the Great Archer and the Serpent Slayer. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Izuku finally spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. Where do people go when the ocean takes them? Diana's kind eyes softened with a sorrow that seemed as ancient as the island itself. She did not offer him empty platitudes or easy lies. The Amazons believe that all brave and gentle souls journey to the Elysian fields, she said, her voice a low, soothing balm. It is a place of endless sunlight and peace, where there is no more pain or fear. I believe your parents, who fought to save you, are there now, at rest. The answer didn't magically heal him, but it offered a small, quiet place to put his grief. It gave him an image of peace to hold against the violent chaos of his memories. He began to look at Diana not just as a rescuer, but as a beacon. She was impossibly strong. He'd seen her lift a fallen marble pillar with one hand to clear a path. But her true power, he was beginning to understand, was her kindness. It was a strength that didn't crush, but sheltered. His curiosity, a fundamental part of his nature that had been dormant under the weight of his loss, slowly began to reawaken. He started asking questions, timidly at first, then with a growing, familiar eagerness. He asked about the armor the guards wore, the names of the strange, beautiful birds in the gardens, the language they spoke that sounded like flowing water. Diana answered every question patiently, a small smile playing on her lips as she saw the spark of the boy he was meant to be returning to his eyes. But outside the sanctuary of his room, the island was in turmoil. His presence was a stone dropped into a perfectly still lake, and the ripples were spreading. He would sometimes hear raised voices from the corridors, sharp, angry debates that would fall silent the moment he was seen. The stares he received when Diana escorted him for short walks in the gardens ranged from cold hostility to a tense, unnervous curiosity. He was a creature in a zoo, a specimen to be observed. The word he heard most often, spat like a curse from the lips of the red-haired warrior, Artemis, was male. He didn't understand why it was a bad thing, only that it was the source of all the anger directed at him. He learned to make himself small, to keep his eyes down, to fade into the background. He was an intruder in paradise, and he felt it in his bones. While Izuku took his first tentative steps in a new world, Queen Hippolyta sought guidance from the old one. The chamber of the oracle was deep beneath the royal palace, a place untouched by the sun. The air was cool and thick with the smoke of burning laurel leaves and myrrh. The only light came from a single, ever-burning brazier in the center of a circular room, its flames casting dancing, prophetic shadows on walls carved with images of the past and future. Menodora, the oracle of Themyscira, sat on a simple stone tripod over a fissure in the rock from which faint, colorless vapors arose. She was an ancient Amazon, her eyes clouded with the sight of things beyond mortal ken, her face a roadmap of centuries. You seek answers regarding the boy, my queen, Menodora stated, her voice a dry, rasping whisper that seemed to come from the stone itself. It was not a question. I seek clarity, Hippolyta corrected, her regal posture unbent even in this sacred, intimidating space. My daughter's heart has led us to break our most sacred law. My head tells me the law exists for our protection. The island is divided. I must know if this child is a poison or something else. The oracle breathed deeply of the vapors, her body swaying. Her clouded eyes rolled back in her head. When she spoke again, her voice was different, layered with echoes, as if 1,000 voices were speaking through her. The loom of fate is tangled, queen of the Amazons. Man's world chokes on a beautiful lie, a symbol of peace that casts a long and hungry shadow. The age of gods fades, and the age of man-made titans rises. Hippolyta's brow furrowed. A beautiful lie? A symbol of peace? She thought of the news that sometimes reached them from the outside world, of the costumed heroes who fought their garish battles in the streets of glass and steel cities. Perhaps it was one of them. When man's world is shrouded in this lie. The oracle's voice grew stronger, ringing with the clarity of prophecy. A champion with the heart of an Amazon, but born of no Amazon, shall wield the truth as his shield. He will be the bridge unlooked for, the weakness that becomes a strength, the key to a door you do not yet know is locked. The echoes faded, and Menodora slumped on her tripod, breathing heavily, the vision having passed. The chamber was silent once more, save for the crackling of the brazier. Hippolyta stood motionless, the oracle's words settling deep within her. The prophecy was, as always, a labyrinth of its own. But the key phrases resonated with her decision. Heart of an Amazon, but born of no Amazon. It could mean no one but the boy. He was not a poison. He was a key. But a key to what? And what was this beautiful lie that shrouded the world? She had her answer. Or, at least, she had her justification. The trial would proceed. It was no longer just a political necessity to appease Artemis's faction. It was a divine imperative. She had to know if the small, green-haired boy recovering in her palace truly possessed the heart of an Amazon. 2 days later, Izuku was summoned to the throne room. He walked beside Diana, his small hand clutching the hem of her tunic. He had been dressed in a simple, loose-fitting white chiton that felt strange against his skin. The throne room was even more intimidating than he remembered, filled with dozens of the tall, powerful warriors, their armor gleaming, their faces impassive masks. Artemis stood near the throne, her arms crossed, her eyes burning a hole into him. Queen Hippolyta sat upon her throne, a figure of immense power and grace. Izuku Midoriya, she said, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. Her use of his full name was a shock, a stark reminder of the life he'd lost. You have been granted sanctuary on this island, an unprecedented act that goes against our most ancient laws. That sanctuary must be earned. You will face 3 trials, designed to test not your body, but your spirit. To prove you are not a threat to our home, you must show us the quality of your heart. Do you understand? Izuku, trembling under the weight of 100 pairs of warrior eyes, could only manage a small, jerky nod. Be brave, Izuku, Diana whispered, giving his shoulder a gentle squeeze before stepping back to join the other Amazons. Just be yourself, be yourself. The words echoed in his head. Who was he, though? He wasn't the happy, hero-obsessed boy on the boat anymore. He was just a survivor. Small, scared, and alone. But as he looked from the queen's stern face to Artemis's hostile glare, a tiny spark of defiance ignited within him. He had survived the storm. He would survive this. For his parents. For Diana. He straightened his small back and lifted his chin. I understand, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, but clear and steady. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps respect, passed through the queen's eyes. Then let the first trial begin. The first trial, the test of empathy. Izuku was led from the throne room to a large, open-air coliseum, a smaller version of the ones he'd seen in history books. Tiers of stone seats rose around a circular, sandy arena. The Amazons followed, filling the seats, their murmurs a low hum like a hornet's nest. He was left standing alone in the center, the sun warm on his head, the silence of the arena deafening. A heavy gate on the far side of the coliseum groaned open. From the darkness within, a low, guttural snarl echoed, a sound of pure pain and fury. Izuku flinched, his heart hammering against his ribs. 2 Amazons prodded something forward with the butts of their long spears. The creature that stumbled into the sunlight was something straight from Diana's stories. It had the body, tail, and back legs of a magnificent lion, and the head and forelegs of a giant eagle. Its feathers were the color of burnished gold, its fur a tawny brown, but both were matted with dirt and dried blood. A thick, leather collar was around its neck, attached to a heavy chain held by the guards. One of its powerful forelegs was bent at an unnatural angle, and its great eagle's head whipped back and forth, its beak snapping, its amber eyes wild with agony and fear. It was a griffin, and it was grievously wounded. This is Ito's. Queen Hippolyta's voice boomed from the royal box. One of our most noble companions. He was injured during the storm, his wing broken and his leg pierced. Our finest healers have been unable to approach him. His pain has made him savage. The trial is simple, child. Soothe the beast. Izuku stared, frozen in terror. The griffin was huge, easily twice his height if it stood tall. Its talons looked like they could shred steel. Its beak could snap a tree branch, and it was looking right at him, its body tense to spring, held back only by the chain. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a clear warning. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to flee. He glanced up at Diana. She stood in the stands, her expression tense but encouraging. Just be yourself. Izuku took a deep, shaky breath. What would All Might do? He'd probably punched the griffin's pain away. But Izuku wasn't All Might. He was just Deku. Useless. That's what Kaken had always called him. But then he looked at the griffin again, and for the first time, he forced himself to see past the terrifying monster. He saw the tremble in its leg. He saw the desperate fear in its eyes. It wasn't angry, it was hurting. It was cornered. It felt just like he did, scared and alone. His fear didn't vanish, but something else rose to meet it, a deep, aching empathy. He took one small, slow step forward. The griffin roared, a terrifying sound that shook the very air, and lunged against its chain. The Amazons in the crowd murmured, some reaching for their weapons. Artemis watched with a cynical sneer, certain the boy would break and run. Izuku stopped. He didn't run. He made himself smaller, sinking into a crouch, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "It's okay," he whispered, though the creature couldn't possibly understand him. "I'm not going to hurt you." He began to do what he did best: analyze. He ignored the giant, snapping beak and the deadly talons. He focused on the details. The right foreleg was held off the ground. There was a nasty, swollen gash on its upper thigh, dark and inflamed. And sticking out of it, almost hidden by the matted fur and feathers, was a long, black sliver of wood, a piece of wreckage from the storm, no doubt. The thorn. The source of the infection, the heart of the pain. The healers couldn't get close because they approached as healers, with tools and intent. They saw a patient. The guards saw a monster. Izuku saw a creature in pain, a creature who needed help. He took another slow step. And another. He never took his eyes off the griffins, trying to project every ounce of calm and kindness he possessed. He stopped about 10 feet away, well within lunging distance if the chain were to break. He sat down in the sand, crossing his legs. He just sat there, for a full minute, then another, simply watching and breathing. The griffin's roars subsided into low, suspicious growls. Its head was still raised, its eyes still wary, but it had stopped fighting the chain. Slowly, ever so slowly, Izuku began to inch forward on his hands and knees, moving as gently as a whisper of wind. "I see it," he murmured, his analytical muttering starting up unconsciously. "It's right there, must be pressing on a nerve. That's why you can't let anyone touch it, it hurts too much." The Amazons watched in stunned silence. This was not what they had expected. They had expected screaming, crying, a pathetic display of male weakness. They were witnessing a quiet, methodical act of incredible bravery. When he was just an arm's length away, the griffin tensed, a deep growl vibrating through the ground. Its sharp beak was inches from his face. Izuku froze, his heart in his throat. He could smell the creature's wild, musky scent. He met its fierce, amber gaze and did not look away. "Please," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Let me help you. I know it hurts." He extended a small, trembling hand, not toward the wound, but to the side, palm up, a gesture of peace. He waited. The griffin stared at his hand, then back at his face. For a heart-stopping moment, it looked as if it would strike. Then, with a low, mournful cry, it lowered its great head and nudged his hand with its beak. The touch was surprisingly gentle. Taking that as permission, Izuku moved with painstaking care. He reached toward the wounded leg. The griffin flinched but did not pull away. His small fingers found the splinter. It was slick with blood and deeply embedded. "This is going to hurt," he said softly. "I'm so sorry." He took a firm grip, closed his eyes, and pulled. The griffin screamed, a piercing, hawk-like shriek of agony, and thrashed its head. But it did not strike him. Izuku scrambled back, holding the bloody, foot-long piece of wood in his hand. Dark, foul-smelling pus and blood gushed from the wound. The griffin slumped to the ground, its body shuddering, its breathing ragged. The immediate, sharp pain was gone, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache. It turned its head and began to lick the now clean wound. After a moment, it looked at Izuku. The wildness was gone from its eyes, replaced by a weary intelligence, and something that looked almost like gratitude. It let out a soft chuffing sound and laid its head on the sand. Izuku, shaking with adrenaline and relief, dropped the splinter and simply stared. In the stands there was complete, utter silence. Then, from the royal box, Queen Hippolyta began to clap, a single, slow, deliberate sound. Soon, another joined her, then another, until the entire Colosseum, save for a stone-faced Artemis and her followers, was filled with the sound of applause. Izuku looked up and saw Diana, a brilliant, proud smile lighting up her entire face, tears shining in her eyes. He had passed the second trial, the test of intellect. For the second trial, Izuku was taken to the base of a towering, sheer cliff face into which a great bronze door was set. Intricate, shifting patterns of gears and levers were carved into its surface. "This is the labyrinth of Antiope," General Philippus announced, her voice stern and official. "My predecessor, the greatest strategist the Amazons have ever known. The labyrinth was her training ground. It is not a place of monsters, but a puzzle of the mind. The walls shift, the paths twist, the exit is never in the same place twice. Brute force will gain you nothing within its walls. Many a prideful warrior has been lost for days, only to be rescued after they have admitted defeat." She handed him a thin piece of slate and a nub of chalk. "Find the exit before the sun sets. That is your trial." The great bronze doors swung inward, revealing a dark, cool passageway. Izuku took a deep breath and stepped inside. The doors boomed shut behind him, plunging him into near darkness, the only light coming from glowing moss that grew in patches along the stone walls. The air was still and cold. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own breathing and the faint, deep grinding of stone on stone. The labyrinth was alive. His first instinct was to panic. The corridors all looked the same. Every turn seemed to lead back to where he started. After 20 minutes of what felt like aimless wandering, he realized Philippus was right. Just walking, just trying to guess, was useless. He was a mouse in a trap. He forced himself to stop, leaning against a cool stone wall. He closed his eyes. "Think, Izuku, think. Analyze. Like a hero." He opened his eyes and looked at his tools. A slate and chalk. He wasn't meant to just wander. He was meant to observe. To find the pattern. He returned to the entrance, a small, circular room, and made a mark on the floor with his chalk. He chose the right-hand path and began to walk, but this time, he walked slowly, paying attention to every detail. He ran his hand along the wall. He listened. He heard it again. The deep, rhythmic grinding. It wasn't random. He timed it. Every 5 minutes, like clockwork, he would hear the sound, and feel a faint vibration through the soles of his feet. The maze was shifting on a schedule. He began to map. It was like one of the puzzles in his schoolbooks, but 1,000 times more complex. He would draw a section of the maze on his slate, wait for the grinding sound, and then re-explore, noting which walls had moved, which corridors had opened or closed. His muttering, a habit he thought he'd lost in his grief, returned in full force. "Okay, so this section rotates 90 degrees clockwise, but the northern corridor only opens on the third shift, which means the central hub is on a separate timer. Maybe it's not a timer, maybe it's pressure plates." He spent hours in the shifting darkness, his world shrinking to the maze, the slate, and the puzzle. He forgot the Amazons waiting outside. He forgot the trial. He was completely absorbed by the intellectual challenge, his mind firing on all cylinders. He made mistakes. He got turned around. He found himself in dead ends that hadn't been there minutes before, but he never gave up. He would erase a section of his crude map and start again, refining his theory. He discovered the secret was not in the walls, but in the floor. Faintly glowing runes were embedded in the stone, and they would brighten and dim in a specific sequence just before a shift. The sequence was the key, a map of the coming changes. Following the glowing runes, predicting the shifts, he moved through the labyrinth with a newfound confidence. He was no longer a victim of the maze, he was its partner, dancing to its rhythm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he saw it. Not a bronze door, but an archway of living wood, with sunlight and fresh air pouring through it. He had solved it. He stepped out onto a high ledge overlooking the Colosseum, blinking in the late afternoon sun. The Amazons gathered below looked up, their faces filled with astonishment. He had been inside for nearly 5 hours. No one had ever solved the labyrinth that quickly on their first attempt. Artemis stared, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She had been certain he would fail, that his nerve would break in the dark, shifting tomb. But he hadn't. He had used his mind, a tool she rarely valued, to overcome a challenge that had bested many of their strongest warriors. She said nothing, but the sneer was gone from her face, replaced by a look of grudging contemplation. The third trial, the test of courage. For the final trial, Izuku was brought back to the throne room. The mood was different now. The open hostility had been replaced by a quiet, uncertain respect. He had shown them empathy that bordered on magical, and an intellect that was truly formidable. But the final trial was the most important. Queen Hippolyta descended from her throne. In her hands she carried a golden lariat that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, humming with a power that made the air around it vibrate. "This is the lasso of Hestia," the queen said, her voice solemn. "It is one of our most sacred treasures. It is impossible to lie while held by its light. It compels the truth, not just from the tongue, but from the deepest corner of the soul. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the facing of truth. You will stand before this council, encircled by the lasso, and answer one question." Hippolyta stepped forward, the golden light of the lasso growing brighter. Izuku felt a wave of warmth wash over him, a feeling of absolute clarity. It wasn't frightening. It was cleansing. He felt as if he couldn't hide anything, even from himself. The queen gently draped the glowing rope in a loose circle on the floor around him. He now stood in a ring of pure, golden truth. The queen looked down at him, her eyes seeming to pierce right through him. Her voice was soft, but it filled the silent hall. "Izuku Midoriya, after all you have suffered, after all you have lost, why do you want to live?" The question struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was the question he had been too afraid to ask himself. Why? Why him? Why did he survive when his parents didn't? What was the point of being here, alone, in this strange, terrifying place? The lasso pulsed with a gentle warmth, and the truth bubbled up from the depths of his being, raw and unfiltered. Tears began to stream down his face, but he did not sob. He spoke, his small voice filled with a terrible, profound honesty that silenced every heart in the room. I don't know if I do," he began, the confession tearing from him. "Every time I close my eyes I see them. I feel the water. It's so cold. I'm so scared. Most of me wishes I was with them in the Elysian fields. It would be easier. It wouldn't hurt so much." He choked on a sob, his small fists clenched at his sides. The Amazons listened, their warrior hearts moved by the naked, honest grief of a child. "But," he continued, lifting his tear-streaked face to the queen, "when the boat was breaking, my dad told me to be brave. And my mom, she said they loved me. They saved me. They gave me their lives. If I just give up, if I stopped trying, then it was for nothing. Their love was for nothing." He looked around the room, his gaze falling on Diana, who was watching him with tears silently tracking down her own cheeks. "And when I was on the beach, I was so alone. I thought I was going to die. I've never been so scared. I don't ever want anyone, to feel that scared and that alone ever again." His voice grew stronger, fueled by a nascent, fiery conviction that came from the very core of his being. The lasso around him blazed, its light filling the throne room. "So I want to live to be strong," he declared, the words bursting from him. "Not strong like you." He looked at the armored warriors. "Not with swords and spears. Strong enough to stand in front of someone who's scared and tell them it's okay. You're safe. Strong enough to help. So that no one has to be alone in the storm. That's why. I want to live, so I can be someone's hero," he finished, panting, the raw emotion leaving him trembling. The truth of his heart, his simple, pure, and utterly heroic desire, hung in the air, captured in the golden light of the lasso. Queen Hippolyta slowly recoiled the lasso, its light fading back into a gentle shimmer. She looked at the small boy who had laid his soul bare, and she saw the prophecy fulfilled. He had the heart of an Amazon, the very best of them. She turned to her council, her face a mask of regal certainty. "The trials are concluded," she announced. "He has shown compassion that shames our cynicism. He has shown an intellect that honors our wisdom, and he has shown a courage of the heart that is the equal of any warrior in this room. He is no threat to Themyscira. He is worthy of our sanctuary. She looked down at Izuku. You may live among us, Izuku Midoriya, under my protection. A wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled his knees washed over Izuku. He had done it. He was safe. Then, Diana stepped forward, her face radiant with pride and purpose. She knelt before her mother's throne. My queen, she said, her voice ringing with conviction, it is not enough that he simply live among us. This boy has a spirit unlike any I have ever known. A hero's spirit, waiting to be forged. I would not leave him to wander our libraries and gardens. I wish to train him. I formally request to take him as my protégé. My apprentice. The request hung in the air, even more shocking than the queen's verdict. To train a boy? To teach him the Amazonian way? It was unthinkable. Artemis took a sharp breath, about to voice a furious protest, but Queen Hippolyta raised a hand, silencing her. The queen looked from her daughter's determined face to the small, exhausted, but resolute boy. She saw the bridge the oracle had spoken of. A bold request, my daughter, Hippolyta said, a genuine, rare smile gracing her lips. But a wise one. His spirit must be nurtured, his mind honed, his body strengthened. If he is to be the champion the prophecy foretells, who better to guide him than our greatest champion? She rose to her full height, her voice resonating with finality. The request is granted. Izuku Midoriya is now the apprentice of Princess Diana. Let it be recorded in our laws. So it is decreed. Izuku stared, his mind reeling. Apprentice? Diana's apprentice? He looked at the beautiful, powerful princess kneeling on the floor, and she turned her head to look at him, giving him a warm, reassuring wink. In that moment, a new chapter of his life began. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless, hero-loving boy from Japan. He was no longer the sole survivor, the child of the storm. He was something new. He was the boy who had passed the trial of the heart, the ward of a queen, and the apprentice of Wonder Woman. His path was no longer a mystery. It was just beginning. The verdict of the trial was a decree, but it was not a spell. It changed Izuku's legal status on the island, but it did not magically alter the hearts and minds of 1,000 warriors steeped in 3 millennia of tradition. He was no longer a castaway to be judged, but a fixture to be scrutinized. His new beginning was not a clean slate, but a fresh page on which every action, every word, every failure would be meticulously recorded by 100 wary eyes. His first taste of this new reality came with his change of address. He was moved from the gentle, anonymous care of the chambers of healing to a set of private quarters adjoining Princess Diana's own. The room was beautiful in the severe, elegant way of all Amazonian architecture. It was carved from the same glowing white marble as the rest of the palace, one entire wall an open archway leading to a balcony that offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the city and the turquoise sea beyond. A simple bed with a woven wool blanket, a sturdy wooden desk and chair, and a large, empty chest for clothes were the only furnishings. It was a world away from his old bedroom in Mizutofu. That room had been a chaotic shrine to All Might, its walls plastered with posters, its shelves overflowing with action figures, every surface a testament to a singular, all-consuming dream. This room was a void. It was quiet, austere, and achingly empty. It held no memories, no history. It was a space waiting to be filled, and the sheer potential of it was as terrifying as it was liberating. An Amazon artisan, a woman with kind eyes but a silent tongue named Lyra, brought him his new clothes. They were not the soft, loose robes of a patient, but the practical garments of a student. A simple, sleeveless linen chiton, dyed a deep forest green, that fell to his knees. A leather belt to cinch it at the waist, and a pair of sturdy, custom-made leather sandals that felt strange and flimsy compared to the cushioned sneakers he had worn his entire life. As he dressed himself, the alien fabric felt rough against his skin. He looked at his reflection in a polished bronze shield hanging on the wall. The boy staring back was a stranger, small and wiry, with a mop of unruly green hair that was the only familiar part of him, swallowed by the strange, ancient clothing. He looked like a child playing dress-up in a museum. He was the ghost of a boy from another world, haunting a paradise that wasn't his. The weight of his new position, as Diana's apprentice, settled on him like a physical cloak. It was a tremendous honor, he knew that. Diana, the warrior princess who had saved him, who had shown him more kindness than he thought possible, had chosen him. But the honor was edged with a sharp, cutting fear. How could he possibly live up to it? He was just Izuku. Quirkless, clumsy Izuku. He had passed the trials, yes, but those were tests of heart and mind. Now, it seemed, the true trial was about to begin, the trial of the body, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was a trial he was destined to fail. His education began not in a training yard, but in the heart of the city itself. Diana believed that before he could learn to be a warrior, he had to understand what it was he would one day be asked to protect. They walked the wide, marble avenues of Terna, and for the first time, Izuku saw the city not as a beautiful prison, but as a living, breathing community. He saw Amazons who were not just warriors, but sculptors, their hammers and chisels coaxing breathtaking figures from blocks of stone. He saw poets and philosophers engaged in passionate debate in the shade of olive groves, their voices rising and falling in a cadence that was both argument and music. He saw farmers tending to lush, terraced gardens that clung to the city's cliffs, their hands coaxing life from the rich soil. He saw engineers maintaining intricate aqueducts that carried fresh, clear water through the city with a quiet, gurgling hum. "We are warriors, Izuku," Diana explained as they watched a metalsmith with powerful, corded arms hammer a glowing piece of bronze into a delicate gorget. "But that is not the sum of who we are. We are artists, thinkers, builders. We fight so that all of this," she gestured to the vibrant city around them, "has the freedom to flourish. Our strength is not for conquest, or for glory. It is a shield. That is the first principle of our philosophy, peace through strength. We must be strong enough that peace is the only logical outcome." This was a radical concept for a boy raised on a diet of heroics that was defined by explosive, city-smashing brawls. Heroes in his world demonstrated their strength by fighting. They proved their worth in combat. The idea that the ultimate goal of strength was to prevent a fight was entirely new. Their next lesson took place in the Great Library, a cavernous hall where thousands of scrolls were nestled in floor-to-ceiling alcoves. An elderly Amazon named Cleo, the head archivist, gave Izuku a nod that was almost, but not quite, welcoming. Diana led him to a special, guarded chamber. In the center of the room, on a velvet-draped pedestal, rested the lasso of Hestia. Even when coiled and dormant, it seemed to hum with a life of its own, its golden fibers radiating a soft, warm light. "This is our most sacred relic," Diana said, her voice hushed with reverence. "You felt its power during your trial. It compels truth. But the truth, Izuku, is more than just the opposite of a lie." She picked it up, the golden rope unspooling in her hands like liquid sunlight. "Deception, deceit, misunderstanding, these are the seeds of almost all conflict in man's world. A man fears what he does not understand. He hates what he fears. He attacks what he hates. The truth is a sword that cuts through that fear. It is a light that banishes the shadows of ignorance." She held the end of the lasso out to him. "To be a true hero, a true champion of the Amazonian way, is not just to fight villains. It is to be a warrior for the truth, to bring clarity where there is confusion, and understanding where there is hatred. The lasso is a weapon, yes, but its greatest power is not to bind, but to reveal." Izuku stared at the glowing rope, his mind racing. He thought of all the fights he'd seen on the news, heroes and villains trading blows and witty one-liners. But how many of those fights could have been avoided entirely if both sides had simply understood the truth of the situation? The thought was staggering. The final core lesson came on a cliffside overlooking the sea, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. "The goddesses tasked us with a sacred duty," Diana said, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of water. "To protect the world of men from its own worst impulses. To be a beacon of hope and a bastion of peace. We are the guardians of the innocent. This is not a choice, Izuku. It is a responsibility. A burden we accept gladly. To have great strength and not use it to shelter those without is the greatest of sins." Izuku listened, his heart aching with the memory of his own helplessness in the storm. To shelter those without. That was it. That was the core of the feeling he tried to explain during his trial. Diana had just given it a name. It wasn't a desire. It was a duty. That evening, back in the stark emptiness of his new room, Izuku did something that felt both like a betrayal and a necessary evolution. He reached into the small satchel that held the few possessions salvaged from the wreck, a change of soaked clothes, a waterlogged wallet of his father's, and his all-might figure. He took the small plastic hero and set it on his desk. He looked at the familiar, unwavering smile, the ridiculously sculpted muscles, the bright, primary colors. For his entire life, this smile had been the answer to everything. I am here, it seemed to shout, a promise that victory was assured. All Might was the symbol of peace because he was the strongest, because he always won. But Diana's philosophy was more complex. It was quieter, deeper. It wasn't about winning. It was about protecting. It wasn't about a symbol. It was about a duty. The smiling figurine suddenly seemed simple, a child's answer to a very adult question. With a reverence that felt like a farewell, Izuku took the All Might figure and carefully placed it inside the large, empty wooden chest. He closed the lid, the soft thud echoing in the quiet room. He wasn't rejecting his hero. He was putting away a piece of his childhood. He was accepting that his path would not be the one he had always dreamed of. It would be something different. Something harder. He sat at the desk and pulled out a fresh, blank scroll and a pot of ink, gifts from the archivist Cleo. The paper felt strange, textured under his fingers. He dipped the quill, a feather from a sea eagle, into the ink. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, at the top of the scroll, in his neat, slightly shaky handwriting, he wrote a new title. He did not write Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14. He wrote Combat Analysis and Amazonian Studies, Volume 1. His formal training began the next morning at dawn, and it was every bit as brutal as he had feared. The main training ground of the Amazons, the Gymnasium of Athena, was a vast complex of sand pits, obstacle courses, archery ranges, and sparring circles. It was a place that smelled of sweat, dust, and effort. His first instructor was Philippus, the stern general of the Amazon army. Her task was to build his foundation, and she approached it with the grim determination of a sculptor trying to carve a statue from a block of soft, crumbling sandstone. The first lesson was running. Endurance is the bedrock of a warrior, Philippus stated, her voice flat and unimpressed. You will run the perimeter of the gymnasium until I tell you to stop. The perimeter was a mile-long track of soft, unforgiving sand. Izuku started off with a burst of nervous energy, his new sandals slapping awkwardly against the ground. He was passed within the first minute by a group of young Amazon initiates, their long, powerful strides eating up the ground as they chatted and laughed, barely breaking a sweat. By the end of the first lap, his lungs were on fire. A sharp stitch had developed in his side, and his legs felt like they were filled with wet cement. He stumbled to a halt, hands on his knees, gasping for air, his vision swimming with black spots. Philippa stood before him, her arms crossed, her expression unmoved. Is that all? She asked, her voice laced with disappointment. I have seen elders with war wounds run farther. Again, and so it went. He would run until he collapsed, rest for a minute, and then be forced to run again. Humiliation was a constant companion. He was lapped so many times he lost count. He fell, scraping his knees and hands on the coarse sand. Tears of frustration and pain streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat, but every time Philippus barked. Again, he pushed himself back to his feet and forced his trembling legs to move. He would not quit. He couldn't. Archery was next, under the tutelage of a sour-faced Artemis, who had clearly been assigned the duty as a punishment. The bow is an extension of the warrior's will, she said, her voice dripping with disdain as she thrust a small, unadorned training bow into his hands. It was the smallest bow they had, made for a child, but to Izuku, it felt impossibly heavy and stiff. It requires strength, focus, and a steady hand. You possess none of these things. His first attempt was pathetic. His arms shook as he tried to pull back the string. The effort was immense, a straining, full-body tremor. The arrow, when he finally managed to release it, didn't fly. It flopped, tumbling end over end and clattering to the ground a mere 10 feet in front of him. A chorus of cruel, sharp laughter erupted from a group of Artemis's acolytes, young warriors who mirrored their mentor's contempt. "Look at the little man-child," one of them sneered. "He holds a bow like a wet noodle. Perhaps we should give him a needle and thread," another added. "That might be more his speed." Artemis did nothing to silence them. She simply watched, a grim satisfaction on her face. "Your arms are weak. Your stance is atrocious. Your focus is non-existent." Again, day after day, it was the same. He would struggle to draw the bow, his muscles screaming in protest. His arrows would fly wide, thudding into the dirt or sailing clear over the target buttress. The mockery was relentless. The other warriors began to call him a name. It was a bastardization of his own, a cruel play on the characters. Izuku. Written differently, it could be read as Deku, one who can't do anything, a useless person. "Look, it's the Deku," they would mutter as he walked past. Did the Deku manage to hit the target today? Or just his own foot? The name stuck. It followed him everywhere, a constant, sneering reminder of his inadequacy. It burrowed deep into his soul, finding a home in the fertile ground of his own self-doubt. He was Deku. He was useless. He was letting Diana down. The lowest point came during his first sparring session. He was pitted against a young Amazon girl named Lyda, who was perhaps a year or two older than him. She was graceful and fast, her movements fluid and confident. Izuku, armed with a blunted wooden practice sword, felt clumsy and slow. The match, if it could be called that, lasted less than a minute. Lyda disarmed him with a flick of her wrist, swept his legs out from under him, and pressed the tip of her wooden sword gently against his throat. She helped him up with a polite, but pitying smile. They sparred 5 times. He lost 5 times. He never even came close to landing a blow. After the 5th defeat, as he picked himself up from the dust once more, his body aching, his spirit crushed, the laughter of the onlookers was too much. The dam of his resolve broke. He threw the wooden sword down, hot, angry tears blurring his vision, and fled the gymnasium. Diana found him in his room. He was curled up on his bed, his face buried in his pillow, his small body racked with silent, hiccuping sobs. The scroll of his new notebook lay on his desk, the first page filled with detailed, brilliant observations. He had spent the previous night not sleeping, but watching the Amazons train from his balcony. He had filled the scroll with sketches and notes, his analytical mind a world away from his failing body. Artemis, aggressive, forward-moving style. Relies on overwhelming strength and speed. Tends to overcommit on lunging strikes, leaving a momentary opening on her left flank. Favors power over precision. Philippus, defensive specialist. Master of the shield and spear. Uses shield not just for blocking, but as a weapon to unbalance opponents. Footwork is economical, perfectly balanced. Creates a kill zone and forces enemies into it. Diana, fluid, adaptable. No single style. Seamlessly transitions between offense and defense. Uses opponents' momentum against them. Extraordinary leverage and timing. Her power is a tool, not a crutch. She fights with her mind first, her body second. Diana picked up the scroll, her eyes scanning the meticulous notes. A slow, proud smile spread across her face. She rolled it back up and sat on the edge of the bed, placing a gentle hand on Izuku's trembling back. "They call me Deku," he mumbled into the pillow, his voice thick with shame. "It means I'm useless. And they're right. I can't run. I can't shoot a bow. I can't fight. I'm weak. I'm letting you down." "Izuku, look at me," Diana said softly. He slowly, reluctantly turned over. His eyes were red and puffy, his face streaked with dirt and tears. "I have read your notes," she said, holding up the scroll. "This is not the work of a useless person. This is the work of a brilliant strategist. You see things that even seasoned warriors miss. You see the patterns beneath the chaos. This," she tapped his head gently, "is your greatest weapon. It is a weapon no one else on this island possesses. But my body can't keep up," he whispered miserably. "My mind knows what to do, but I'm just too weak." "You are not weak, Izuku. You are untrained, Diana corrected him firmly. Your body is a human body. It is not an Amazon's. You cannot expect to match them in strength. Not now. Maybe not ever, and you do not have to. She leaned in closer, her expression serious. They call you Deku to hurt you. To make you feel small. Words only have the power we give them. So let us give it a new power. She tapped the scroll again. In the old tongue of a land far from here, there is a word that sounds very much like Deku. The word is Dekiru. Do you know what it means? Izuku shook his head. It means you can do it. His breath hitched. Dekiru. You can do it. The words were a balm on his wounded spirit. That is what I see when I look at you. Diana continued, her voice filled with an unshakable faith that felt like a shield. I see a boy who can do anything he sets his mind to. So let them call you Deku. Let them mock you. Every time you hear that name, I want you to hear my voice instead. Hear Dekiru. Let it be a reminder not of what they think you are, but of what I know you will become. Let their mockery be the fuel for your fire. Redefine the word. Make it your own. Izuku stared at her, his tears subsiding. The simple shift in perspective was like the sun breaking through the storm clouds. The name was no longer a brand of shame. It was a challenge. A promise. Dekiru, he whispered, testing the sound of it. Diana smiled. Now get up. The sun is not yet set. Your training is not over for the day. He slowly sat up, his body still aching, his exhaustion profound. But the crushing weight on his soul had lifted. He looked at Diana's outstretched hand, and then at the scroll on his lap. He thought of his parents' sacrifice. He thought of his promise in the throne room. He wiped the tears from his eyes with the back of his hand and took her hand. His grip was small, but it was firm. He returned to the gymnasium that evening, long after everyone else had left. He went to the archery range, picked up the small, despised bow, and a single arrow. His arms still shook. His stance was still clumsy. But as he drew back the string, his muscles screaming, he didn't hear the laughter of the other Amazons in his head. He heard Diana's voice. Dekiru. The arrow flew. It missed the target entirely, burying itself in the dirt wall of the buttress. But it flew straight. Izuku allowed himself a small, weary, determined smile. He reached for another arrow. He had a new name. He had a new purpose. The first, clumsy scrawl of a hero had been made. And he would spend every day for the rest of his life trying to live up to it. He would show them. He would show them all what Deku could do. The passage of time on Themyscira was measured not in the turning of calendar pages, but in the slow, inexorable erosion of stone by the sea, the patient growth of ancient olive trees, and the honing of a warrior's edge. For Izuku Midoriya, the 7 years that followed his trial were a blur of pain, perseverance, and profound transformation. The island, with its relentless demands and unwavering standards, became the forge, and he, the soft iron, was thrust into its flames to be hammered into something new, something strong. The boy of 8, small and breakable, haunted by the ghosts of the storm, was gone. In his place stood a young man of 15. He was not tall or broad-shouldered like the sons of man's world he sometimes saw in the scrying pool. He was lean and compact, built not for overwhelming power but for whipcord speed and startling agility. His green hair was still an untamable mess, but it was often tied back with a leather cord to keep it from his eyes during training. His face had shed its childish roundness, leaving behind high cheekbones and a jawline that spoke of a stubborn, hard-won resolve. His eyes, large and green, still held the boundless empathy that had won him his place here, but now they also held the keen, analytical fire of a seasoned strategist. His body was a map of his journey. A latticework of pale, silvery scars crisscrossed his arms and torso, mementos of errant training blades, falls from obstacle courses, and sparring sessions where he had been a moment too slow. A particularly jagged scar curved over his left shoulder, a permanent reminder of a misjudged encounter with a young chimera in the royal menagerie. These were not marks of shame. On Themyscira, scars were a testament to one's dedication. They were pages of a story written on the skin, a story of survival and strength. And Izuku's story was long. He stood now in the center of a sun-drenched sparring circle, dust motes dancing in the morning light. Across from him stood Diana, a vision of divine power and effortless grace. She wore simple training leathers, her movements relaxed, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "Again, Izuku," she said, her voice calm. There was no signal. No count. The fight simply flowed. Izuku exploded into motion, a low, green-clad blur. He didn't charge head-on, that would be suicide. Instead, he circled, his movements fluid and unpredictable, his sandals barely whispering on the hard-packed earth. He was a stone skipping across the surface of a pond, never staying in one place long enough to sink. Diana was the pond, vast and deep, her stillness a deceptive mask for the power that lay beneath. She tracked his movements, her body shifting with an economy of motion that was breathtaking. Izuku feinted left, then darted right, his hand lashing out in a knife-hand strike aimed not at her face or chest, but at the cluster of nerves in her shoulder. It was a probe, a question asked in the language of combat. Diana answered by turning her shoulder a fraction of an inch at the last possible second. His strike glanced off the hard muscle, its energy dissipating harmlessly. Her hand, moving in a relaxed, almost lazy arc, caught his wrist. Her grip was like a velvet-covered vice. This was the critical moment, the nexus where his old self would have panicked and tried to pull away, a battle of strength he could never win. The new Izuku, the forged Izuku, did the opposite. He didn't resist. He flowed with it. Opponent initiates grab on right wrist, clockwise torque, probable throw over the hip. He muttered under his breath, his analytical mind processing the data at lightning speed. Counter by relaxing the joint, go with the pull, use her own momentum to create an opening. He let his body go limp for a split second, then channeled his energy into a spin, using her pull as the axis. He rotated with the throw, his free hand slapping against her extended arm to disrupt her balance while his leg hooked behind her knee. It was a sequence of breathtaking complexity, executed in the space of a single heartbeat. For a fraction of a second, he had her. The greatest warrior he had ever known was momentarily unbalanced. He pressed his advantage, attempting to transition into a joint lock. It was then that Diana reminded him of the vast gulf that still separated them. She did not resist his lock. She simply wasn't there. With a shift of her center of gravity so subtle it was almost imperceptible, she negated his leverage. Her other hand came up, not in a strike, but with 2 fingers extended, and gently tapped him on the forehead. Izuku froze, his intricate counterattack falling apart like a house of cards. The 2-finger tap was their signal for a clean, undeniable hit. He was beaten. He slumped, breathing heavily, sweat stinging his eyes. He had lasted 47 seconds. A new record. Diana released his wrist and smiled, a brilliant, proud smile that made the effort worthwhile. Your flow is improving, Izuku. You saw the throw and you didn't fight it. You became part of it. Your body is finally beginning to listen to your mind. Almost, he gasped, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. I almost had the lock. Almost is the space where a true warrior lives, she replied, her voice gentle. It is the space you will spend your entire life trying to cross. Come. Let us rest. Your day is far from over. His mastery, such as it was, had been painstakingly built, discipline by discipline, scar by scar. Each of his tutors had presented a different kind of mountain to climb. Hand to hand with Diana, Diana's instruction was the heart of his physical education. She understood from the beginning that he could never be an Amazon. He lacked their divine heritage, their raw physical power. To train him in their style of overwhelming force would be to set him up for failure. So, she taught him a new language of combat, a fusion of philosophies drawn from 1,000 different cultures she had observed over the centuries. The Amazons are mountains, she had explained to him once, years ago. They meet force with greater force. They are immovable. You, Izuku, must be a river. A river does not smash the mountain, it flows around it. It finds the cracks, the weaknesses. It is relentless, patient. And over centuries, the river can wear the mountain down to sand. You will not win in a single blow. You will win in 1,000 small, perfect movements. His style was a blend of pankration, the ancient and brutal Greek martial art that combined wrestling and boxing, and systema, a fluid, adaptable art from the cold lands of Russia. From Pancration, he learned leverage, joint locks, throws, and how to fight from the ground. He learned that a perfectly applied lock could neutralize a stronger opponent, that a person's own weight was their greatest weakness in a throw. From Systema, he learned breathing, relaxation, and constant, ceaseless movement. Diana would make him spar for hours in a shallow pool of water, forcing him to feel the flow and drag, to move with the path of least resistance. She taught him to absorb the energy of a blow, not by blocking it with rigid muscle, but by allowing his body to undulate, to ripple, to spread the kinetic force out so that it became harmless. His analytical muttering, once a sign of his nervous anxiety, became his greatest tool. In the heat of a spar, it was his combat computer, processing data aloud. Heavy right foot stance, favors haymakers, leaves ribs exposed for 0.8 seconds after a missed swing, stamina dropping, breathing is ragged. He didn't just fight his opponents, he dissected them, piece by piece, until he understood the machine of their movements better than they did themselves. Diana never discouraged it. She recognized it for what it was, the sound of his mind at work. Archery with Artemis. His relationship with Artemis was a long, cold war of attrition. For years, she remained his harshest critic, her face a permanent mask of derision. His lack of physical strength was a constant, glaring failure in her eyes. He could not properly draw a heavy Amazonian war bow, and his arrows lacked the percussive, shield-shattering force she valued. The mockery from her followers continued, though it lost some of its edge as he grew older and more resilient. The name Deku was a constant, but Diana's lesson had taken root. He wore it now like a piece of armor. The more they said it, the harder he worked. The breakthrough came not from his arms, but from his mind. He accepted he would never be a powerful archer. So, he decided to become the most precise one. He began filling his notebooks with a new kind of analysis. He charted wind patterns on the coastal range. He filled pages with complex equations on trajectory and projectile drop. He studied the fletching of arrows, experimenting with different feathers to see how they affected flight stability. He practiced his breathing, learning to release the arrow not at the peak of his strength, but in the silent, still moment between heartbeats. He spent an entire month doing nothing but drawing the bow and holding it, aiming at a single leaf on a distant tree, but never firing. He was training his muscles, yes, but more importantly, he was training his focus, honing his mind to a razor's edge where the bow, the arrow, his eye, and the target all became a single, unified entity. Artemis watched all of this with silent, cynical skepticism. She believed he was wasting his time on parlor tricks, avoiding the hard work of building true strength. She decided to humiliate him once and for all. One afternoon, she strode onto the range where he was practicing. "Deku!" she called out, her voice sharp. The entire range fell silent. "You spend your days with your scribbles and your meditative nonsense. Let us see if it has any worth in the real world." She pointed to a practice dummy 200 paces away, an extreme distance even for a seasoned Amazon. Hanging from the dummy's leather cuirass was a small, silver bell, no bigger than his thumb. "The wind is gusting from the west. The light is failing." Hit the bell. It was an impossible shot. A cruel, public test designed to expose him as a failure. Izuku said nothing. He knocked an arrow, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He closed his eyes for a long moment, feeling the wind on his face, listening to its song as it whispered through the pillars of the gymnasium. He didn't fight the wind. He listened to it. He opened his eyes, drew the bowstring back to his cheek, and held it. He wasn't aiming at the bell. His notebook was open in his mind's eye, the charts, the equations, the dozens of hours of observation all coalescing into a single, perfect solution. He aimed high and to the right of the target, a point in the empty air that his calculations told him was the correct one. He breathed out. The world went silent. He released. The arrow flew, a thin black line against the darkening sky. It seemed to hang in the air for an impossibly long time. It soared upwards, then began its descent. The wind, which would have sent a direct shot wildly astray, caught the arrow and guided it, correcting its path like an invisible hand. The arrow did not strike the bell. It struck the tiny leather cord from which the bell was hanging. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the tiny silver bell, its cord severed, fell to the ground with a faint, clear tinkle that was audible in the stunned silence of the range. Izuku lowered his bow, his breathing steady. He hadn't shattered a target. He had performed surgical archery. He looked at Artemis. The sneer was gone from her face. Her eyes were wide, not with admiration, but with a kind of shocked, grudging reassessment. She had witnessed something that defied her understanding of what archery was. It wasn't power. It wasn't strength. It was intellect. A different kind of weapon altogether. She stared at him for a long, silent moment, then turned on her heel and walked away without a word. From that day on, she never called him Deku again. She simply called him boy. And from Artemis, that was the highest praise he could have ever hoped for. Strategy with Philippus. If the sparring circle was his crucible and the archery range was his trial, then the strategy chamber was his sanctuary. Here, with General Philippus, he was not the weak male, the clumsy apprentice. He was a prodigy. The chamber was dominated by a massive sand table, a detailed topographical map of Themyscira and its surrounding islands. Philippus would use small, carved figurines to represent armies, heroes, and monsters, presenting Izuku with tactical and strategic puzzles. A legion of Gorgons has landed on the western shore, she would say, her voice the low rumble of a tactician at work. They are moving to secure the high ground at Mount Eryx. Your forces consist of 1 legion of hoplites and 2 companies of archers. The Queen has forbidden a direct assault until reinforcements arrive in 2 days. Your objective, contain and harass. What is your strategy? Izuku's mind would light up. He would move the figurines with a confident hand, his muttering now a low, continuous stream of tactical analysis. Gorgons have a petrifying gaze, so direct visual contact is a liability. Hoplites in phalanx formation would be too slow and vulnerable. We can't meet them head-on, but their weakness is their serpentine lower body, poor traction on loose, upward slopes. We cede the high ground for now. Use the archers to create a kill zone at this choke point, forcing them to spread out. Use the hoplites in smaller, mobile units to stage lightning raids on their flanks, targeting the stragglers. Psychological warfare is key. Hit and run, never let them rest, make them feel like they are surrounded. We don't contain them with a wall of shields, we contain them with fear and exhaustion. Philippus would listen, her stern face unreadable, occasionally interjecting with a sharp question or presenting an unexpected complication. A flight of harpies has joined them, providing aerial reconnaissance. Your hit-and-run tactics are now visible from above. How do you adapt? Izuku devoured the scrolls in the library's military wing. He studied the campaigns of Antiope, the strategies of Odysseus, the formations of the great armies of history. He learned that battles were not won by the strongest army, but by the army that made the fewest mistakes. He learned that logistics, morale, and terrain were just as deadly as any sword. Philippus, who had at first treated him as a curiosity, came to regard him with a deep, profound respect. She saw in him the reincarnation of the island's greatest strategic minds. He had the rare ability to see the entire battlefield, to think 10 moves ahead, to find a single, elegant solution to a hopelessly complex problem. It was in this room, moving wooden figures in a box of sand, that Izuku Midoriya was truly, undeniably, an Amazonian warrior, which brought him to today. The annual Festival of Ares, a series of athletic and martial competitions, was reaching its climax. It wasn't a true battle, but a celebration of skill and a chance for warriors to test their mettle against one another. For the first time, Izuku was not just an observer. He was a participant. He had performed admirably. In the archery competition, he had placed second, losing only to Artemis herself in a contest of pure distance, but winning the precision event with a display that had earned him quiet, respectful applause. In the Pancration tournament, he had advanced to the quarterfinals, a feat no one had expected. Now, he stood in the final sparring circle of the main event. His opponent was Theron, one of Artemis's fiercest lieutenants. She was a mountain of a woman, a head taller than him and easily twice his weight in sheer muscle. She fought with 2 blunted practice short swords, a whirlwind of aggressive, powerful offense. She was everything he was not. The crowd was a mix of supporters. The younger initiates, who had grown up with the legend of his trials, watched him with a kind of awe. The older traditionalists, Theron's comrades, watched with skeptical glares, waiting for the little strategist to be broken by true Amazonian power. Artemis stood at the edge of the circle, her arms crossed, her expression a blank slate. The fight began. Theron, wasting no time, charged. It was a terrifying onslaught, a storm of steel and fury. Izuku, armed with only a single, slender practice sword, was instantly on the defensive. He didn't try to block. To meet her blows head-on would be to have his sword, and likely his arms, shattered. He became the river. He flowed, his footwork a dizzying dance of evasion. He parried, not by stopping her blades, but by deflecting them, using their own momentum to send them wide, each redirection a carefully calculated expenditure of energy. The clang of steel on steel was sharp and percussive, a frantic rhythm against the roar of the crowd. He was being driven back, forced to give ground. To the untrained eye, it looked like a rout. But Izuku was not retreating. He was gathering data, twin blade style, purely offensive, no defensive stances. He muttered, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. Her right hand attacks are faster, but the left hand swings are wider, more powerful. She shifts her weight completely to her front foot for the overhead chop, leaves her exposed for a full second. That's the opening. But she's too fast to counter directly. Need to disrupt her rhythm first. He dodged under a wide, sweeping slash that would have taken his head off, and for the first time, went on the offensive. It wasn't a strike. As he came up, he used the pommel of his sword to jab sharply into her thigh, a targeted strike at the vastus lateralis muscle. Theron grunted in surprise and pain, her rhythm faltering for a split second. It was all he needed. He moved in close, too close for her to get a full swing with her swords. He wasn't fighting her blades anymore. He was fighting her body. His sword became a tool for locking and trapping. He hooked her right wrist with the cross-guard of his blade, using his free hand to brace it. He spun, forcing her arm into an awkward, painful angle. Theron roared in frustration and tried to bring her other sword around. Izuku was ready. He released her wrist and dropped, sweeping her front leg out from under her. The giant Amazon crashed to the ground, the impact shaking the sparring circle. The crowd gasped. She was far from beaten. She rolled, coming up to one knee with a snarl, her eyes burning with fury. She had underestimated him. She would not make that mistake again. She lunged, a single, powerful thrust aimed straight for his heart. It was the move he had been waiting for. The overhead chop. The one where she put all her weight, all her momentum, into a single, predictable attack. He did not dodge. He did not block. He moved towards it. At the last possible second, he sidestepped, letting the powerful thrust slash through the air where he had just been. Her momentum carried her forward, her body overextended, unbalanced. It was the opening he had analyzed, the 1-second window he had engineered this entire fight to create. He stepped in behind her, his movements a fluid, practiced sequence from his training with Diana. He wrapped an arm around her throat, not to choke, but to control. His other hand grabbed her sword arm, locking it. He dropped his weight, sinking to the ground and pulling her with him. His legs wrapped around her torso, locking her into a rear-naked choke and body triangle. It was a perfect submission hold. Theron was immensely strong, but strength was useless here. She thrashed, trying to throw him off, but he was like a limpet, clinging to her, his technique negating her power entirely. The crowd was utterly silent, watching in disbelief. He held the choke, applying steady, inexorable pressure. He wasn't trying to injure her, only to force a submission. After a few seconds of fruitless struggle, her air supply dwindling, Theron did the only thing she could. She tapped the ground twice with her free hand. The signal of surrender. Izuku immediately released the hold and scrambled back, his chest heaving, his body screaming with exertion. He had won. The silence held for a moment longer, a collective, stunned intake of breath. Then, the gymnasium exploded in applause. It was a roar of approval, louder and more genuine than any he had ever received. Theron rose to her feet, shaking her head not in anger, but in sheer disbelief. She walked over to him, her face a mixture of shock and newfound respect. She extended a hand. "You are no brute, boy," she said, her voice raspy. But you fight with the wisdom of a general. It is an honor. Izuku, still catching his breath, took her hand and shook it. He looked past her, his eyes scanning the crowd. He saw Philippus, who gave him a rare, genuine smile and a crisp, approving nod. He saw Diana, her face alight with a pride so radiant it felt like the sun. Then, his eyes found Artemis. She stood in the same spot, her arms still crossed. She was not smiling. She was not applauding, but the contempt was gone from her face, replaced by a sharp, intensely analytical gaze. She had seen the entire fight not as a brawl, but as a perfectly executed strategy. She had seen him outthink and outmaneuver one of her best warriors. She held his gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not friendship. It was respect. The respect of one warrior for another. She turned and melted back into the crowd. For Izuku, that single, grudging nod was a greater victory than the submission he had just won. The boy they called Deku, the useless one, had just proven that there was more than one way to be strong. He had been hammered and heated, quenched and folded, and had emerged from the forge not as a pale imitation of an Amazon, but as a blade of a different metal, with an edge all his own. The victory at the Festival of Ares was a turning point. It was a line drawn in the sands of the gymnasium, separating the boy who was tolerated from the young warrior who was respected. The whispers of Deku did not vanish overnight, but their tone began to shift. The sneering edge of contempt was replaced by a grudging, almost mythic, curiosity. He was no longer just a male child. He was the Iskin, an old, almost forgotten Amazonian term that meant more than just strategist. It implied a weaver of fates, a mind that could see the threads of battle and pluck them like a harp. For Izuku, the change was palpable. The cold shoulders he passed in the corridors now often came with a curt nod. Younger Amazons would occasionally approach him, not with mockery, but with genuine questions about technique or strategy. He had won a bout, but in doing so, he had earned a measure of belonging that had eluded him for 7 long years. Yet, a private council between a queen and her daughter revealed that this victory, as significant as it was, had only highlighted a greater, more dangerous truth. They stood on the queen's private solarium, a high terrace fragrant with night-blooming jasmine, the stars of a mythic sky scattered like diamond dust above them. The island was quiet, the celebrations of the festival having given way to the gentle hum of the cicadas and the distant sigh of the sea. "He has exceeded all of our expectations, Mother," Diana said, her voice a low murmur of pride. "His mind is a weapon sharper than any sword on this island. His body, while not Amazonian, has been honed to a remarkable degree. He has the heart of a true champion." "I agree," Hippolyta replied, her gaze distant, fixed on the shimmering, invisible barrier that separated their world from the one beyond. "And that is precisely the problem. We have forged a magnificent blade, my daughter. But it is a blade with no aegis. It is a blade of mortal steel, destined to be sent against monsters of divine iron." The queen turned to face her, her expression grave. "You and I, we have seen what awaits him in man's world. We have seen the rise of these metahumans, beings who can level cities with a glance, who move faster than thought, who possess the strength of titans. Izuku's skill is sublime. His intellect is a gift from the goddesses themselves. But against a man who can fly and project fire from his eyes, what good is a perfectly executed joint lock? What good is a perfectly aimed arrow?" Diana's pride was tempered by the cold chill of her mother's logic. She had seen it herself on her brief sojourns into the world. The sheer, overwhelming power of individuals with quirks that defied the laws of physics. Izuku had learned to fight Amazons, warriors who were strong and fast, but still bound by the familiar rules of biology and gravity. The world beyond their shores had long since abandoned those rules. His fight with Theron was a masterpiece of strategy and skill, Hippolyta continued. But Theron did not have super speed. She could not teleport. She could not incinerate the ground he stood on. "We have given him the soul of a hero, Diana. But we have not given him the means to survive long enough to use it. If he is to be the bridge that the oracle foretold, he cannot be a bridge that collapses under the first real weight." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. Izuku was their hope, their champion in the prophecy. but they were in danger of sending their greatest hope to his certain death. "There must be a way," Diana said, her voice tight with resolve. "Our patrons, the goddesses, they would not set him on this path only to see him fail." "Perhaps not," Hippolyta conceded. "The goddesses work in ways that are not always clear to us. But there is one among them, a god, not a goddess, who has always valued craft and ingenuity above brute strength, one who understands that the right tool in the right hands can be more powerful than the strongest arm." A spark of understanding lit Diana's eyes. "Hephaestus, the divine smith. The lord of the forge," Hippolyta confirmed with a nod. "He does not answer prayers for strength or victory. He answers prayers for creation. For the means to an end. It is a long shot, my daughter. The gods have grown distant, their attention drawn to other realms, other wars. But if we are to give our champion a fighting chance, if we are to arm his brilliant mind, we must ask for a smith's blessing." 2 days later, Diana led Izuku away from the familiar grounds of the city, up a winding, treacherous mountain path he had never been permitted to climb before. The air grew thinner, cooler, and carried the metallic tang of ozone. The lush greenery of the lower slopes gave way to jagged, volcanic rock, twisted into strange, tortured shapes. "Where are we going?" Izuku asked, his breathing steady despite the steep incline, a testament to his years of relentless conditioning. "We are going to pray," Diana answered simply. At the mountain's peak, nestled in a caldera that still smoked with faint, sulfuric vapors, was a place that felt older than the island itself. It was not a temple of gleaming white marble, but a cavern of raw, obsidian-like rock. The entrance was a jagged maw in the mountainside, and the air that billowed from it was hot, smelling of coal smoke and molten metal. This was the forged shrine of Hephaestus, a place of primal creation. Inside, the heat was intense. The only light came from the fiery glow of a river of magma that flowed through a deep channel in the cavern floor, illuminating walls embedded with raw, uncut gems and veins of gold, silver, and a strange, celestial bronze. In the center of the cavern, on a great, flat slab of anvilstone, lay offerings left over centuries, a perfectly balanced sword, a shield inlaid with an intricate star map, a delicate silver tiara. These were not pleas for help, but works of art, offerings from one group of artisans to their ultimate patron. "This is a sacred place, Izuku," Diana said, her voice a respectful hush in the echoing cavern. "The Amazons are warriors, but we are also craftswomen. Hephaestus is the god of the forge, of invention, of the spark of genius that turns raw material into a work of art or a tool of purpose. We come here not to beg, but to offer our own creations, to show that we are worthy of his inspiration." "But I have nothing to offer," Izuku said, feeling small and out of place. He was no smith, no artisan. His hands were calloused from sword hilts and bowstrings, not from the hammer and tongs. "Oh, I think you do," Diana replied with a cryptic smile. She unslung a heavy leather satchel from her shoulder, the one she had insisted he bring. "Show him." Confused, Izuku opened the satchel. Inside were his notebooks. Not just the most recent one, but all of them. 7 years of his life, bound in leather covers crafted by Lyra the artisan. 7 years of meticulous observation, of intricate diagrams, of complex tactical analysis, of restless, burning intellect committed to scroll and ink. Volume 1, with its childish scrawl, detailing the basic fighting styles of Philippus and Artemis. Volume 3, filled with his first clumsy attempts at calculating arrow trajectories. Volume 7, containing a 200-page breakdown of the strengths and weaknesses of every mythical beast in the royal menagerie. Volume 12, his masterpiece, a complete strategic analysis of the defense of Turna, complete with contingency plans for every conceivable threat, a work that had earned a rare, approving grunt from General Philippus herself. "These?" Izuku asked, bewildered. "But they're just notes." "They are not just notes," Diana said, her voice ringing with passion. "They are the work of a master craftsman, Izuku. Your mind is your forge. Your observations are your raw materials, your strategies are the weapons you create. This is your life's work. Show him. Show him the quality of your craft." Understanding dawned on Izuku. This was not about physical offerings. It was about presenting the fruit of his labor, the evidence of his spirit. With a reverence he had not known he possessed, he took out the scrolls, one by one, and carefully unrolled them upon the great anvilstone. He laid them out, a tapestry of his mind. The detailed anatomical drawings of a hydra, highlighting the vulnerable nerve clusters at the base of each neck. The complex, branching diagrams of his labyrinth solution. The precise, mathematical beauty of his archery calculations. The elegant, brutal simplicity of his pancration flowcharts. It was a staggering display of a mind that saw the world as a complex, beautiful, and solvable machine. When he was finished, he and Diana stood back, the warm glow of the magma river illuminating the vast sea of ink and parchment. Diana stepped forward and raised her voice, not in a shout, but in a clear, ringing tone that resonated with the very stone of the cavern. "O divine smith, lord of the forge, Hephaestus!" she began, her voice a formal prayer. "I, Diana, princess of Themyscira, come before you, not to ask for a blade that cannot be broken, or a shield that cannot be pierced. I come on behalf of this mortal, Izuku Midoriya, my apprentice, my champion." She gestured to the scrolls. "We offer not bronze nor gold, but the work of a mind that honors your own divine craft. He is a strategist without peer, an analyst of unparalleled genius. He possesses the heart of a hero, but the fragile body of a mortal man. He is destined for a world of titans and monsters, a world that would shatter him before his work can truly begin." Her voice swelled with a daughter's fierce, protective plea. "I do not ask you to make him strong. He is already strong in the ways that matter. I ask you to arm his strength. I ask you to give this brilliant mind the tools it needs to function on the battlefield of the gods. Give him an aegis. Give him a fighting chance. If you find his craft worthy, bless him with a portion of your own." She finished, and a profound silence fell over the cavern, broken only by the soft, bubbling hiss of the magma. For a long, tense minute, nothing happened. The air grew heavy, thick with anticipation. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest. He felt foolish, a child showing his crayon drawings to a master artist, hoping for a nod of approval. Then, the cavern began to tremble. It was a low, deep vibration that grew into a resonant hum, as if a great furnace had just been ignited deep within the mountain's heart. The river of magma began to glow with a ferocious, white-hot intensity, its light so bright Izuku had to shield his eyes. A wave of heat, dry and powerful, washed over them. From the very center of the magma river, a figure began to rise. It was not a man of flesh and blood, but a being of living fire and molten rock, his form constantly shifting, his face a mask of cracked obsidian from which burned eyes of pure, stellar fire. He was massive, his shoulders as broad as the cavern entrance, his hands large enough to crush boulders. One of his legs was twisted, malformed, and he leaned heavily on a great hammer whose head was a captured, spinning star. This was the Lord of the Forge, in all his terrible, awesome glory. Hephaestus turned his fiery gaze upon the two figures at his anvil, and then down at the sea of scrolls. The air crackled with immense power. Izuku felt as if his very soul was being weighed, measured, and assayed for its quality. The god did not speak in words. His voice was the grinding of continents, the roar of a volcano, a sound that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the mind. A mind that sees the world not as it is, but as a system of levers and fulcrums. A craftsman's eye and a warrior's soul. Interesting. Hephaestus reached out a hand of molten rock, the size of a small cart. Izuku flinched back, but the god's hand did not touch him. It hovered over the scrolls, and for a long moment, the fiery eyes seemed to read every word, absorb every diagram, in a single, silent instant. The design is flawed. The vessel is weak, prone to fracture under stress. But the engine is a masterpiece. It requires reinforcement. A chassis to protect the engine. Hephaestus turned his gaze from the scrolls to Izuku, and it felt like being pinned under the weight of a mountain. He saw everything. Izuku's years of grueling, painful training, his constant struggle against the limitations of his own body. The endless frustration of knowing exactly what to do, but lacking the physical means to do it. The god seemed to find this amusing. Or perhaps, intriguing. Strength is a crutch for the unimaginative. Power is a blindfold for the uninspired. You have neither. Good. You have learned to compensate. To innovate. You do not seek power. You seek efficiency. Hephaestus raised his other hand, and the magma river roared. Two streams of glowing, celestial bronze, the color of a sunset sky, flowed up from the fiery depths like obedient serpents. They coiled and twisted in the air before the god, who began to shape them with his bare hands, as if they were soft clay. He did not use his hammer. His will alone was the tool. The bronze flowed and hardened, cooling into shapes of impossible grace and complexity. Gears spun into existence, plates of metal folded and interlocked, and channels for some unseen energy were etched into the surface with lines of glowing, golden light. The process took only a minute, but it was a minute of creation so profound it felt like watching the birth of a star. When he was finished, two objects hovered in the air, shedding the last of their casting heat. They drifted down and settled upon the anvilstone with a soft, melodic chime, displacing the scrolls, which miraculously remained untouched by the heat. One was a pair of vambraces, gauntlets that would cover the forearm from the elbow to the knuckles. They were forged from the celestial bronze, but inlaid with overlapping plates of a darker, almost black metal. The golden energy channels pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, like a sleeping heartbeat. The other was a pair of greaves and sandals, designed in the Amazonian style, but again, etched with the same intricate, glowing patterns. The gauntlets of Atlas, the god's voice boomed in their minds. They do not grant strength. Foolish. They manipulate kinetic force. They absorb. They store. They redirect. A mountain's fury can be caught in the palm of your hand, and then returned to sender. A useful tool for one who understands leverage. The sandals of Hermes, he continued, his gaze shifting to the other pieces. They do not grant speed. Inefficient. They fold space. A single step, a league traversed. A short, sharp burst. From here to there, instantaneously. Useful for one who understands positioning. The god's fiery form began to sink back into the magma river, his work complete. The tools are provided. The craft is up to you. Do not disappoint me, little mortal. A fine engine should not go to waste. With a final, deafening roar, Hephaestus submerged, and the cavern returned to its former state. The intense heat faded, the blinding light subsided, and the only sound was the gentle hiss of the magma. On the anvil, amidst the scrolls of Izuku's life's work, lay the gifts of the god. For a long time, neither Izuku nor Diana moved. They were simply too overwhelmed, too awestruck. Finally, Diana let out a shaky breath and knelt, running a reverent hand over the surface of one of the gauntlets. It was warm to the touch, and it seemed to hum with a quiet, contained power. He answered, she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief and gratitude. He truly answered. Izuku approached the anvil as if in a trance. He reached out a trembling hand and touched one of the gauntlets. The moment his skin made contact with the celestial bronze, the golden channels flared to life, the light racing up his arm and seeming to connect with his very nervous system. He felt a connection, as if the artifact was scanning him, learning him, syncing with him. Put them on, Diana urged, her eyes shining. With fumbling fingers, Izuku unstrapped his simple leather training bracers and slid his arms into the gauntlets of Atlas. They were impossibly light, and they seemed to mold themselves to his arms, resizing for a perfect, snug fit. The same happened with the sandals of Hermes. They were no heavier than his old leather sandals, but they clung to his feet and ankles as if they were a second skin. He stood there for a moment, adorned in divine artifacts, and felt exactly the same. There was no surge of power, no feeling of invincibility. They were just beautifully crafted pieces of armor. What now? He asked. No, Diana said, a predatory grin spreading across her face, the kind she usually reserved for the beginning of a particularly challenging sparring session. Now we learn how to use your new toys. They went to a secluded training ground high in the mountains, a wide, flat plateau of solid rock, far from the city. The god said the gauntlets absorb and redirect kinetic energy. Diana mused, tapping her chin. Let us begin with a small test. She stood 20 feet away from him. Brace yourself. Raise your arms in a defensive posture. Izuku did as he was told, raising his arms to shield his face, the bronze of the gauntlets gleaming in the sun. Ready! Diana's fist shot out. It was not her full-strength punch, not the kind that could shatter mountains. It was a controlled, measured blow, but it still moved with supersonic speed, breaking the sound barrier with a sharp crack. The punch was not aimed at him. It was aimed at the air 10 feet in front of him. The shockwave, the displaced kinetic force, hit him like an invisible freight train. He had braced for it, but he was still hopelessly unprepared. He was lifted off his feet and thrown backward 100 yards, tumbling end over end like a ragdoll before crashing into a pile of rocks. He lay there, groaning, every bone in his body feeling like it had been rattled loose. A cloud of dust settled around him. The gauntlets were completely unscratched, but they hadn't seemed to do anything. Diana was at his side in an instant, her face a mixture of concern and scientific curiosity. "Are you all right?" "I think so," he moaned, sitting up. "What was that?" "I thought they were supposed to absorb the impact." "Perhaps they did," Diana said, helping him to his feet. "And perhaps you are not yet able to contain what they absorb. It is like trying to drink from a fire hose. The power is too much, too fast. You must learn to control the intake." She looked at the gauntlets, which were now pulsing with a much brighter, more intense golden light. "They absorb the energy, Izuku. Look. They are fully charged." Izuku looked down. The light was almost blinding, and he could feel a thrumming, vibrating power contained within the metal, desperate to be released. "Now how do you release it?" Diana wondered. "Try punching that boulder." She pointed to a rock the size of a small hut. Izuku felt foolish. He had never been a puncher. His style was all about evasion and leverage. But he walked over to the boulder, took a deep breath, and swung. He put all his training into it, rotating his hips, putting his whole body into the motion, just as Diana had taught him for delivering open-handed strikes. The moment his fists began to move forward, he felt the contained energy in the gauntlet surge down his arm. It was not a pleasant feeling. It was a violent, explosive torrent of power, and his arm, his mortal, untrained for this arm, was the only conduit. His knuckles, protected by the gauntlet, struck the rock. The result was apocalyptic. The contained energy of Diana's shockwave, focused into a single point, was released in a devastating blast. The boulder didn't just crack. It did not just shatter. It vaporized. A cloud of atomized rock and superheated dust exploded outwards. The concussive force of his own punch picked Izuku up and threw him backward even farther than Diana's had, and a deafening boom echoed through the mountains, sounding like the wrath of Zeus himself. He landed in a crumpled heap, his ears ringing, his vision swimming. His entire right arm felt like it had been simultaneously electrocuted and set on fire. He looked at it, fearing the worst. The gauntlet was fine, its light having returned to a soft, gentle pulse. But his arm was a mess. His shoulder was clearly dislocated, and a spiderweb of angry purple and red bruises was already forming under the skin, a visible testament to the sheer, untamed force that had just passed through his limb. Diana was beside him again, her face pale with shock. She gently popped his shoulder back into place with a practiced, painful motion. "By Hera's grace," she breathed, looking at the crater where the boulder had once been. Hephaestus was not exaggerating. Izuku cradled his injured arm, his teeth gritted against the waves of agony. The parallel was so stark, so terrifyingly familiar, it stole his breath. He remembered the grainy footage of All Might he had watched 1,000 times, the hero's arms scarred and twisted from the power he wielded. He remembered the stories of One for All, a quirk that would shatter the body of an unworthy vessel. These gifts, they were his one for all. And just like his hero, his body was not ready. I can't control it," he whispered, his voice shaking with pain and a new, profound fear. "It's too much. It's going to break me." Diana looked at the devastation, and then at his injured arm, and then into his frightened eyes. She did not see a broken boy. She saw the next great challenge. The next mountain to be climbed. "Yes," she said, her voice soft, but her eyes burning with an unshakable resolve. "It will break you. If you let it. If you try to fight it like a brute. But you are not a brute, Izuku. You are a strategist. You will not overpower this force. You will analyze it. You will understand it. You will learn its rules, its limits, its flow. and you will master it. She looked from the gauntlets on his arms to the sandals on his feet. You have been given the tools of a god. Now, the real training begins. The training of how to be worthy of them. Izuku looked at his throbbing arm, at the smoking crater, and at the impossible challenge that lay before him. It was terrifying. It was painful. It was the hardest thing he would ever have to do, but as he met Diana's unwavering gaze, he knew he would not be doing it alone. And for the first time, he felt a spark of something beyond fear. He felt the thrill of a puzzle even more complex than the labyrinth, a power that demanded not strength of body, but strength of mind. It was a challenge made for him.